Ane Crabtree, you are the costume designer on not only Westworld, but also The Handmaid's Tale. There's something about, I guess, dystopia that really seems to attract you. You're currently working on a pilot where you're doing dystopian work as well. Let's go straight to Handmaid's Tale because that is probably going to be the big sensation at the Emmys in a few weeks' time. How'd you become involved in that show?
Handmaid's Tale, I was brought in by Bruce Miller and Warren Littlefield, but I was really excited by being brought in because I actually saw the film when it came out in 1990 and read the book soon after. As a young girl in New York, I saw it, and so when I heard about it, at first I was scared because I didn't want to do a remake of it, and yet The Handmaid's Tale has been remade over and over and over. So I thought, let me see what they have to say and how it's going to be different, and if there's anything new that I can contribute to it. And so I figured out that I could, and then I showed up to work.
Yeah. And, it's been adapted, as you say, from a very famous novel. It's been made as a film. It's been adapted. So it's not like it's a new thing. How much of a challenge was it, though, for you as one of the key people to kind of create the look of the show? How important and challenging was it to make this different and make it new?
It's always a challenge because I never want to repeat anything that's been in existence, and that gets harder and harder as life because everything has repetition. So the challenging thing was also that I had such a love affair with the book, Margaret Atwood's book, and the film that came out in '90. And so, I started looking at different stills of that. And I tried to watch the film, and then I started listening to the book, and then I realized that it was detrimental because when we do a TV series, we tend to shoot, 3 and more episodes at once. And I was starting to get the stories confused from what I was going to film. So I stopped watching the film. I stopped reading the book. And I started jumping around into research that was quite modern and quite current because that was the different thing that we could do was, obviously it's set in the near future, but ours was, 3 years from now. And then all hell broke loose in reality, in real time, and we realized we were actually doing a documentary.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Not.
Kind of not really.
No.
So many people that I spoke to Warren yesterday. I just spoke to Anne this morning, and I mean, no one could ever have known how timely this show became. Everything changed in November in the US and globally, and I'm wondering how much of that affected and informed what you were doing creatively.
Yeah, you know what? It's true. We started filming in September, and November 8th happened, and the schedule was quite big. The schedule was intense, and again, shooting a few episodes at once with quite large amounts of actors and background. I think at first and not just me, I was walking around in a kind of stunned reaction. It's as if endowed, as Aunt Lydia had cattle prodded me all over my brain. And I thought, I can't get emotional or lose sight of what I'm doing. I need to throw everything back into the show, and yet you can't help but be aware of the news, even while trying not to listen to all of the news. People were talking in Canada about what had happened in America, and I think my only resilience, my only way of being righted by that was to throw it back into the work, into the design of things, and act out in a certain way by giving more power to the women and to the people with less power in the script. If it called for it, I had to be honest, but I think it was, an amazing outlet to be able to take something so emotional and so, in a sense, history and life-changing, and throw it back into the work as an artist. It was the only way to not feel crazy and or that I had to just stop everything and go hide somewhere under a rock. You know, I mean, you want to do good work, and you want to be responsible and create and have it, you know, a project be intensely good. So that's A number one. But then if you're a smart person, instead of being shattered completely, you can use that sort of impetus in your creativity to heighten the work. And that's what I decided to do, because I very well could have been the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that translates the costuming on this show. And this is not just because I'm talking to you. It's just when you watch the show, there'll be no gushing here, but the costuming is so critical to this show. Like, really, there aren't many shows where it's more critical than Handmaids. And I would say the same thing for Westworld, but we'll go there in a minute.
Okay.
So talk us through some of the dynamic, like the use of color and those iconic red gowns. They're so important to Handmaids. And so I'd just love to hear your process in trying to get them perfected.
Right. So, you know, yeah, we started with the color red because it was, red is so difficult. Red pops out in the frame no matter what you do. It's difficult cinematically, and it can look, it can help or harm a character if it's the wrong red. And so we started looking at many different colors. I was infatuated with a industrial space that I was working out of that was once an old glass factory. And there was beautiful red paint impregnated into the concrete that had been left there for decades, maybe longer. And there's a sort of red, I'm looking for it now, like red cautionary paint that was used around the fire extinguishers. And those kind of became, I just noticed I'm wearing red today, which I never do. But we looked everywhere. And, you know, we kept taking sort of tiny little Pantone swatches and putting it on everyone's skin. I'm a multiracial person, so it's helpful in the work because, you know, sort of the middle ground in terms of color. And we knew that we were going to have a multiracial cast and also background to change the book. Ultimately, I don't remember if it was Reed Morano or Julie Berghoff who came up with this beautiful photo of red maple leaves against a very, very poignant teal sky. It was a close-up, and it was a nature photograph. And we said, oh, this is it, because you're basically looking at, you know, Alfred next to Serena Joy in a photograph. It just happens to be leaves and sky. And so from that photo came the Pantone colors, and it was the perfect red. And then I found this fabric, you know, I didn't even have to dye it. So it was complete kismet, because usually we needed so much fabric, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of yards. It was daunting to come to that place, but oddly enough, once we found the red and we found the teal, which are perfect kind of 1950s Technicolor version, I mean like a darker Technicolor version of each other. Once we found that, the other colors, I wouldn't say they were easy, but they were easier. And we tried to stay absolutely sticking to the book in terms of the colors. We just changed the Econo wives were meant to be in stripes. And we just said, it's not going to work in the modern world. Let's save all the pattern and texture for the recent past, America. And everything else will be solid, bold blocks of color in the frame. You know, teal for the wives, black for the commanders and their eyes, the all-knowing eyes, navy for the guardians, brown for the ants. And it was very restricting and yet freeing, because it was restricting because you only had a certain color palette with which to use. So it was frightening, you know, and yet I came back to the States very briefly for Thanksgiving, and the world looked really wrong to me in America. You know, like all the pattern and the tight, clingy, stretchy mesh, see-through. I mean, I felt like a pious old aunt, like, this is wrong. But it wasn't as beautiful. Isn't that funny? Like the restriction I fell in love with the restriction, I guess.
Yeah,
I think.
that's fascinating. You know, is it my imagination, or did characters like Offred and even Serena, as we go through the series, are they a little less buttoned up? Are they a little softer? You make Serena seem softer when she's, or vulnerable when she's having a vulnerable moment. I don't know. That just could be in my head. This is coming also from my colleague Amanda Spears, who gave me this question. It's a really good one. And what can you say about that element?
Well, that's very interesting. I would probably ask you a bit more questions about Offred, because she tends to wear the same thing. But yes, well, let me go back to Serena Joy, because that's an easier answer. Yes is the answer. You know, everyone's wearing a uniform, but even when you're wearing a uniform, you have stronger and weaker, more vulnerable days. And so according, you know, it was always according to the script and what she was going through. And there was a certain kind of building through line to, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but, you know, her character changes a bit from episode 1 through 10. And yeah, I mean, the silhouette is everything. When you have a limited color palette and you have, when everything is solid and simple, the real estate of the body and every inch of that real estate becomes very important, more magnified than if you're looking at crazy patterns and trim and sexy tight clothes. Like, everything means something. And so it was actually quite easy for me to use emotional, vulnerable moments to, yes, to change what she was wearing. There's a big schlumpy sweater, maybe your colleague's talking about that one, that I spent $5 on in a thrift store. Hang on one second. Can someone turn off the aging, dying stuff? Sorry. Wow. We're aging and dying stuff for the past. Very loud. Thank you. Sorry. So that is a big thing. Like, the sweater was a big thing. I even made her a little painting smock, you know, that was specific to the scene in terms of vulnerability. And there's even something that she wears for gardening. I mean, it started to become a little bit crazy, but she needed all those things in that. And it wasn't just one color teal. Like, if you look, there's a more saturated teal that we use for strength. And then she's sort of fading away from the frame in a lighter tone when it needs to be that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so we're not going completely crazy. It's actually,
you're not crazy. You're
thank God.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And then I guess, given all the restriction, and that's not a really fair word, because I think, you know, you're working within a certain palette and a certain aesthetic, but then you got to do Jezebel's episode 8, where you were able to deviate and do something really interesting, kind of even slightly Westworldian, I guess. There's a little more of a kind of, you were doing, you know, I guess you could call them prostitutes. So I don't know what kind of.
They were. I mean, they are. I mean, like, gently, we call them prostitutes. They are exactly that. They are women who are not fertile. And Jezebel's is a place where the commanders came together and said, well, let's harken back nostalgically to the past, shall we?
Conveniently, very conveniently, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I didn't want to just do a version. This is me being a female, giving power back to the women. I didn't want to just make prostitutes and call girls for men in that kind of cheeky. And Bruce was very honest. He's like, this is, you know, a very kind of visual cliche. You know, it's funny. These are men that have to have very conservative sex, like, you know, to make babies. So it was a way to bring back all that they knew, you know, from the past. And you can imagine there's only like a tiny amount of men, you know, commanders creating this world, and there's like sports on TV being, you know, watched because there's no TVs, and like girls in perversions of the Handmaid's Tale. I mean, the Handmaid's costumes and their wives. I don't know if you could see it in the frame. I haven't seen that episode yet.
Yeah.
And there's like, you know, not a, I mean, basically, I tried to think about every cliche in porn, and there are many, and they're successful for a reason, right? I mean, I was like, hey, this is what people want when they watch porn. So, and then I tried to throw little visual twists and jokes for the women to be able to have the last word in the Jezebel. So hopefully that shows forth. I don't know.
I think it does. I think it's brilliant. Let's switch to Westworld, otherwise I'll have you here all night.
Okay.
So, like, the boring question, I'm always interested to know how you came to Westworld. How did you get that job?
You know, it's weird. That's another, there's only two times in my life where I have done something that was so important to me as a child and as a young lady. Handmaid's Tale was me at 21 or 22. 30 years later, here I am, you know, doing it as a project. As a child, at the age of 9, I remember seeing Westworld for the first time, and then consequently seeing it many times. In Kentucky, the small town where I'm from, there was a heck of a lot of reruns, or maybe just, you know, in the 60s and 70s, there's a lot of reruns. So that film was oddly something my brother and I loved, and it was, you know, one of the few Asians on TV. Well, actually, no, he's not Asian. Yul Brynner. Everyone thought he was Asian when he first came out, and he, you know, he looked very Asian, but he's actually Russian Cossack. I can't remember, but he kind of, I guess he lied about being Asian at first, which is awesome.
Yeah, cool.
But it's this dashing man that I fell in love with. I wanted to be a cowboy, and so, and the writing is so brilliant. Michael Crichton was so ahead of his time, and when I heard that they were making a TV series, I was worried. I was kind of like, oh, I'm not going to be into that. But then upon actually looking at a documentary, or maybe it was the flip side, or, you know, the smaller part of Westworld when you buy it, there was a whole story on Michael Crichton that I watched that was actually more intriguing than watching Westworld. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I have to do this, because this was a genius who, he passed away so early. He made that movie, he directed it at a time when no one even quite knew him. Mm. And I'm just mesmerized by anybody with a large brain, you know, in that way, and far-reaching thought process. And I thought, this is going to have to be good for me on some level. Of course, I was very interested in the whole super far-reaching future, and, you know, it's still future, it's not period, but looking at the world of the West, and then in the kind of, we decided on a kind of middle 1800s look because it was more interesting. You know, that kind of visual through the eyes of Anthony Hopkins' character, Dr. Ford. I knew that there was some new stuff I could do. And so, and if you look at the dark side of it, the stuff that's actually not quite on camera, but implied and or in the script, the darkness of humans, you know, creating kind of monsters out of robots. And then I love it when the little guy wins. So the robots win, and that I was in for as well, because I think in any kind of dystopian story, it's really about human nature, and that human nature is man going too far. So that really drew me in.
Yeah,
long story.
That's fascinating. You know, like any professional, even myself, when I'm gearing up for a project and I know it's going to be super challenging, I'd be obviously shitting myself. And I'm wondering, probably not literally, but I'm just wondering, like, you know, the sheer volume of looks and styles and whatever in this show is mind-boggling. And I'm wondering then, you obviously took it on. Were there any in particular that you just thought were really, really difficult?
Any costumes that were difficult?
Any particular looks, like, given that you had to do so many, such a wide variety?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, they all were. And that is because, you're talking Westworld now, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
On Westworld, the big challenge was shooting in a location that was over 100-degree heat in the desert with blinding sun over at all times, on a show that was so physical for the actors, you know, and the horses. And knowing that they were going to be baking all day, but knowing that I would have to keep it realistic, you know, in terms of heavy suedes and wool and that sort of thing. What's incredible was the actors were all game, thank God, because I think it helped them. There was not one thing that was challenging because everything was, honey, like everything. And I said, and I actually didn't even realize this until until February. I went to the Design Awards with Jimmy Simpson, who plays, William, and William early on. And I said to someone interviewing me, I said, oh, I never counted how many costumes were needed because I didn't want to be afraid. Came right out of my mouth, and Jimmy started laughing, and I was like, oh my God, that's actually the truth, because we just knew we had to get it done. And our saying on Westworld was, there's no saying no in Westworld. And it was good. Like, it wasn't like, oh, there's no saying no in Westworld. It was, there's no saying no, because if we manage to pull this off, we can actually do any job under the sun, because it's so zen, right? There's so much to do. Lisa Joy and Jonah Nolan are so brilliant in terms of sheer genius level, literally. And so you always had to be on the top of your game. You always had to be physically fit because it was such a rocky terrain, even for the crew. It was like, oh my God. And you had to respect the sheer amount of work that the actors had to do every day. All of that combined made every costume really important. And then add to it everyone getting shot all the time and having to make 1 million of them. You know, it was just like kind of a game, maybe in a way that a video game is. You know, you just kind of clean them up, prop them up, and you know, remake the clothes and make sure that it all is good in the morning, just like the show, but it was real. And actually what was cool is that we had these we were shot at this old, beautiful ranch, and it had 5 buildings, and each building was like a beautiful factory where we made the clothes, the sewing room, the aging, dying room. You know, each room there was one room that had bones in it for the hebdomad. So I was like, God, this is kind of like having a museum, but you know, it's like a working museum where you're using everything. It was a seminal show for me because nothing is frightening to me, like zero. You know, Handmaid's Tale, I wanted to say too, same thing. We refused to count what we needed. I mean, we have a general plan because we have to budget for it, but this, you know, that show, Westworld, Handmaid's Tale, the sheer numbers of the background that are needed to tell that story, and knowing that you have to build it because this world doesn't exist anywhere. The best way is to actually make it. That's happening again on The Passage, the show I'm doing now. And the joke is always when someone says, well, how many do we need? I'm like, we're just going to do it. No, don't ask. Because I don't want them to run out the door crying, you know, like, I'm leaving. But yeah, that's the only way around it.
Wow. One question I'd love to ask costume designers is, when you look back, for example, at the Oscars, you see most of the time the Oscars and other types of awards, they generally like to award period costumes.
Yeah.
Really, and they're, you know, they're big and they're luscious, and contemporary work is always given short shrift. And there are examples of nominations like La La Land and I Am Love in 2010, but generally speaking, it's not the case. And you've designed a number of contemporary costumes. Even in these 2 shows, you have to do contemporary work. What are the challenges of contemporary work? Because a lot of people don't get it.
What are the challenges? You know what? They're the same challenges as period work. I mean, listen, and I'm not just saying that. Like that, it always sounds like if you read it as a reader or if you're as a listener, it just sounds like, yeah, right, sure. But it's really true. Like, I am somebody who very much pushes my team and my tailors to, I'm a girl who loves to make everything simply, and I just said this the other day, because you cannot find what you need in a store. And you're lying if you say you can. I think, you know, there's times that I've grabbed stuff because you're on this crazy schedule and you just need it, you know, within an hour. So, but I am the girl who'll say, you know what, if we make it, it could be exactly for that body type. It can be exactly for the person who is a round, voluptuous woman who needs to run from this point to this point, get shot, fall downstairs, and then get up again because she's a robot, or whatever it is. You know, it's like, it's way smarter, cost effective, and story effective to make the clothing you know, whether it's a period show, whether it's a dystopian future show, whether it's a present day show, you know, certainly there are many stores which are, you know, very much in use by Hollywood and New York that help us. But I'm not going to lie. Like, I think the best way is to paint the palette yourself. It's better for DPs. You know, I tend to have a good reputation and working relationship with DPs, and people on Masters of Sex, the DP there said, I don't have to light. You've lit it for me in the clothing. I mean, it's the highest compliment, because that's what you want. You want to subtract any headaches. You know, if you make the clothing for the actor, it's going to fit him better in a modern day piece, certainly in a period piece. And listen, when you buy stuff, you know, you have to alter it anyway within an inch of its life. So it's not really saving any time. I just find, as an artist, I'm a painter, and it's like, if you're looking for a specific color, it's much easier. It's not just the color, I guess. I actually am always thinking about the whole of the silhouette and how I want it to tell a story. Of course, you can go, and I'm not going to say any names, but like pick a beautiful designer that's going to impress the actor or impress the producer because you've pulled out this luscious thing. Does it support the character? Does it tell the real true story? I'm not going to go to, you know, an expensive Madison Avenue boutique and then shred it, dirty it, and say, oh, but it's a homeless person. I don't, that does happen, but I can't work that way. It's almost like the tell in Vegas, right? I have my body, I cannot tell a lie. If I were to do that from like a fancy boutique, I don't know, like I would drop it and a bat would die by accident. Like I just can't do it. So that's how I work. And I work that way, whether it's present day or period or fantasy or name it. You know, I just think we're here because we're meant to knit the story visually and construct the story through construction. Someone's actually, I wear overalls, and I was in New York at a Starbucks at 4 in the morning, and someone said, are you in construction? And I said, you know what, brother? I am. Yeah. Like, I'm constructing every day, no matter what the story is. So I just think there is no delineation. I'm quite perplexed by the idea that, and I think it's not the world of costume folks. I think it's the world of Hollywood that says, oh, if it's period, it's got to be serious. If it's, you know, blah, blah, blah. If it's, you know, some, I don't know, upstairs, downstairs, I'm going to say, because I don't want to say anything else. But, you know, listen, there's no difference. A sleeve in its construction is just as difficult in modern day as it is period. Perhaps there's more seams. Perhaps there's, you know, but you're deciding when you're creating that, when you're constructing that world around the actor's body. And I think it's just sheer laziness. I think people who don't know what costume designers do say that period. It's like this. Someone saying, Vivaldi, okay, someone we all know sometimes use too much, you know. Vivaldi is so much greater than Philip Glass. He just is. Well, why? Because you're used to hearing those things. You're used to seeing pantaloons if someone says, I want you to make a story about whatever. It's not true. You know, every, you know, what's his name? Is amazing. This new artist, sorry, my brain. I've started buying music again, and that music is just as valid as things that came 50 years, 100 years before. There's no difference. And I think somehow slowly we'll start to see that, because art is art. You know, cinematography, visuals, music, it's all valid, and it's how you make it melodious and harmonic and harmonious and, you know, deep. I think, and how you spin that web. It's not about, let's put this in a box and call it period. Let's put this in a box and call it modern. There's no easy way for the artist to create a modern piece. It's the same journey.
It's the same journey.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Not that I'm opinionated or anything.
No, I love it. I love it. You know, and I thank you for your time. And I have a feeling we're going to see you on Creative Arts Emmy night, and we wish you well. Thank you for your contribution to those shows. I think without
You're
the
so
costumes,
nice.
it wouldn't be the same.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.